Hello, and welcome to a fresh episode of Global Tantrum, the show where political scientists, myself and Galen, do our utmost to explain the post-war international order, first to ourselves and then hopefully to you. I am your host, Steve Halley. With me is my co-host, Professor Galen Jackson. We have taken a month off for end of summer shenanigans. Galen, you have been hiking the wilderness, is my understanding. You look great. You look healthy. You look tan. How did it go?
Thanks, man. That was great. Highly recommend getting into the backcountry for those who are so inclined. Although I've lost a step or 50.
As we all do.
Yeah. I once hiked the northern half of the John Muir Trail, which goes
I've been
from
there.
Mount Whitney to Yosemite. I did the northern half. Yeah, it felt pretty good the whole time, but that was, 8 years ago. And it turns out that 8 years does make an impact as one nears the ripe age of 40.
Yes, that's right. Entropy comes from us all and for us all. Yes, we encourage everybody to get out there, touch grass, touch trees, mountains, trails, all that good stuff. So while you've been doing that, I've been busy trying to crowbar my children back into school, which is always a fun and enjoyable process. We're into week 2 now. We've gotten through some of the panic attacks, and we're now on to the pretending to be sick. So hopefully that'll clear up.
Well, man, you know, a lot of kids don't like school when it starts, but
Yeah,
hopefully they warm up to it as the year progresses.
totally. You mentioned backcountry. That makes for a really nice transition to our topic today. We are going to talk about the Houthis in very rural, mountainous, northwestern Yemen, which is about as backcountry gets, right, Galen? Super isolated, but importantly, proximate to one of the most important naval checkpoints in the world, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is in between the Arabian Peninsula and Eastern Africa. And it is where I think roughly 15 to 20% of the world's shipping goes into and out of the Suez Canal,
Hmm.
connecting the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Ocean. And these guys have been camped out in northwestern Yemen. We've talked about them in reference to Iran, in reference to Hezbollah. They are part of the so-called Axis of Resistance, and they have joined the chat when it comes to the current hostilities in the Persian Gulf. Right, Galen?
Yeah, with potentially significant implications for the wider set of conflicts that have engulfed the Middle East since October 7th, 2023, and
Mm-hmm.
especially since the commencement of the US-Israeli war with Iran about 6 months ago. You mentioned the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The Saudis are still able to get their oil through the Suez Canal,
Mm-hmm.
but the bulk of energy exports from that country are destined for Asia. What that means is those ships would have to reroute, go all the way through the Mediterranean, down the west coast of Africa and around. Let's get them confused. I believe it's the Cape of Good Hope.
I think that's right. Yep.
Okay, and Cape Horn is South America. I think that's right. And from there,
Gotta
go
look at it.
east
Sorry, gotta
to
look at
Asia. Yeah, you can
it.
double check me on that.
Good hope.
Um, and at a time when, as
You
we
are
have,
correct.
okay, glad I have my basic geography facts down. At a time when, as we've spoken about at length, and as everyone in the world at this point probably knows, the Strait of Hormuz is under duress, um, that shipping route has taken on much more significant, you know, implications for global energy markets. Since, as we've talked about, the Saudis have been able to divert a substantial amount of their oil through a pipeline to the west coast of the country. So
Mm-hmm.
the Houthis entering, as we speculated they might at some point, is kind of a big deal. You mentioned, they occupy this mountainous, rugged terrain. That's an important point. It has made dealing with them militarily very, very difficult, going
Mm-hmm.
back really centuries, which, I hope we don't get into too much of that history, although we'll go through some of the more recent stuff. But this has always been a major benefit to groups residing in northwest Yemen, Zaydis, which we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. But that's a real military challenge to confronting the Houthi movement.
Yeah, that's right. Not unlike, some of the areas in Afghanistan, very like mountainous, lots of caves, hard to bomb them. The United States has had to go, Israel has had to go, Saudi has had to go. They're still there. Like, to say nothing of like Yemeni government forces,
Yeah.
because they won a civil war earlier in the century against those government forces and took over the capital of that country, Sana'a. But yeah, they're kind of just like embedded in this tribal area, not super subject to air power, and they're hanging out there. They've got their own air power. They have their own precision munitions. They have short and medium range missiles, courtesy originally of Iran. Now I think largely indigenously produced, and they have drones as well. So they're hanging out in a tough spot right next to one of the most important, again, naval transit routes. And because they're allied with Iran, Iran now has a grip on the west coast of Saudi Arabia and the east coast of Saudi Arabia in terms of the naval routes that they need to get their oil to Asia. And you're right, they can still get oil to Asia from the Red Sea. They just have to go through the Mediterranean. That adds, I think, 2 weeks of transit and quite a bit of expense and risk. And so it drives oil prices up. And that's the common theme.
Now, really quickly, I think we should say who the Houthis are, or,
Let's do that.
the origins of this. But really quickly, just as a quick update, oil prices have not shot up as substantially as some analysts, myself included, have predicted. And the main reason for that seems to be that there's a more significant drop in demand than had been anticipated, largely because China just has so many reserves and has resorted to that. So that
That's
has
right.
not necessarily gone the way the Iranians were hoping, although things can always change.
Not yet. Not yet.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so who are the Houthis? Well, I'm going to try to do this expeditiously, particularly since my shelf life on some of this knowledge has expired. But they come from a group known as the Zaydis, who are Shia Muslims, also known as Fiver Shia, quite a bit different for a whole host of reasons from the majority of Shia, who are Twelver. That's the type practiced in Lebanon, Iraq, and Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Without going into a lot of the doctrinal differences, for some observers, Zaydi Shia actually arguably have more similarities to Sunnis than they do to 12 or Shias. So for my money, the connection between the Houthis and Iran, which we'll get to, is more pragmatic, strategic than religious or ideological, although that does play a certain role. There's something like 10 to 15% of Yemen's population, the Houthis, whereas Zaydis are more like a third. So, and by the way, there are many Yemeni Zaydis who oppose the Houthis, in part because they see them as overly aligned with the Iranians and because their doctrinal and religious practices they think have sort of deviated from what Zaydis traditionally believe. In any case, where does this group come from? Well, Yemen's always been a fairly fractured place. It was actually two countries during the Cold War. There was North Yemen, which was itself involved in a major war that became part of what was called the Arab Cold War, and Egypt and Saudi Arabia backing different forces in that area. There was the only official Marxist state in the Arab world was South Yemen.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, backed by the Soviet Union. Reunification didn't occur until 1990.
Weird.
So, we could start the clock in a number of places. There have been, wars between Saudi Arabia and Zaydi from northwest Yemen going back centuries. I'm going to start the clock in the late 70s when a guy named Ali Abdullah Saleh comes to power. Why is he important? Well, for one thing, reunification happens on his watch, but more importantly, he's not seen as a particularly great ruler.
He lasts for quite a while, right?
33 years, I
Yeah,
believe.
quite a while. Please continue.
But he's viewed as, particularly by what becomes the Houthi movement, as hopelessly corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also doing things like some limited cooperation with the United States and Saudi Arabia, which makes him less popular. There's actually a civil war in the 1990s that he, presides over. But the Houthis emerge as kind of the anti-Saleh, anti-corruption movement in the 1990s. They're called the Houthis because the guy who kind of founds the movement is named Hussein al-Houthi. And one of his descendants, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, is now the current leader of the movement.
Family business, right?
Correct, as is so often the case. I mean, there's a good book, I believe it was a UCLA political science PhD. I think it's Michael Herb, All in the Family.
Yep.
A book about Gulf politics.
Right.
And they become more radicalized, as does much of the Middle East, after the United States invades Iraq in 2003. And it's worth quoting their slogan because I think it gives you a good idea of some of the things they care about, which emerges as a result of that conflict. So in 2003, they declared their slogan to be, "God is great, death to the US, death to Israel, curse the Jews, and victory for Islam."
All the bases.
I think it gives you a good idea of, which side they're on in these conflicts and what some of their beliefs are.
Very similar to the Iranian state motto as well.
Which I believe, was helped inspire this. They also got a lot of backing from Iran and Hezbollah. This really escalates with the Arab Spring, which sees Saleh overthrown in 2011. And he tries to hand off power with the backing of Saudi Arabia to his vice president, which I'm not going to remember the full name, but Mansour al-Hadi, I believe.
Al-Hadi, yep.
Which the Houthis obviously were not satisfied with. And this is what kind of leads to the outbreak of a major civil war in the country. And in 2014, 2015, the Houthis actually take over the capital, Sana'a, which they have ruled largely ever since. And because it's such a populous city, they now preside over something like 70% of the country's population. Mm-hmm. Just to put a cap on it, soon thereafter in 2015, the Saudis, with the backing of the United Arab Emirates, a number of other Gulf states, and with the acquiescence of the Obama administration, begin what turns into a 7-year brutal, massive humanitarian crisis caused by just huge conflict, starvation, credible accusations of war crimes on all sides. Kind of driving force behind that conflict was one Mohammed bin Salman.
MBS, yeah.
I think it's fair to say that military campaign largely failed.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a ceasefire signed in 2022, which left the Houthis in power. There was still the internationally recognized government forces, which control most of the eastern part of the country. But the anti-Houthi alliance is itself fractured. There's a secessionist movement in the south dating back to, as I said, when Yemen was 2 different countries and a number of historical grievances. Things kind of escalated last year, but that brings us largely to today, when they have really sort of joined the fighting and activated a new front in what is increasingly looking like a larger regional conflict.
Yeah, thank you for running us through that. I
hope I didn't confuse everyone. There was kind of a lot to go through.
No, I mean, like, the broad contours are clear. Yemen is a mess, and these guys, the Houthis, are and have been the most powerful group in a country full of groups that are fighting each other for control. It's been pretty stable now for a while. They survived, just indiscriminate carpet bombing by the Saudis. I think the Trump administration also had a go at them.
Yeah, I mean, there was a major blockade in place led by the Saudis, and just last year, the Trump administration kind of fought them to a stalemate.
Yep.
That conflict actually ate up quite a few interceptors, is my understanding, which had implications for the current war.
That was a naval bombardment where we used a bunch of tomahawks, and they kind of, like, the smoke cleared, they're still there. It's like there's a common theme here with these groups. They're pretty difficult to defeat militarily. It's not to say that you can't kill them, decapitate their leadership. The Saudis actually succeeded in doing that, and like assassinating most of their leaders and killing their commanders. But they use the same sort of node-based or mosaic strategy, so it's decentralized. And yeah, they come back. They keep coming back, and there's always more Houthis, right? It's a large family, I guess. I was struck to the extent to which the Houthis are actually a family business. It is a large family, and they've married into the sort of tribal superstructure within northern Yemen. Again, somewhat redolent of what bin Laden and al-Qaeda did in Afghanistan with the Taliban and the Pashtuns, the Pashtun ethnic group in that country. They were not Afghans at all when they arrived there in the 80s and 90s, but they married in to sort of the local power structure, and then the Taliban considered them family, more or less. Kind of a similar situation. They married into getting support, and from there, because they proved to be durable and good at fighting, Iran cultivated them as an asset because they saw, hey, this is a golden opportunity. These guys are a perfectly positioned thorn in global commerce's side, and especially Saudi's side, because Iran and Saudi don't get along. They're sort of regional rivals. So these guys are literally like, right behind Mohammed bin Salman with their missiles and their drones ready to attack, which, they launched a few attacks, I think, earlier this year when the Iran war kicked off, but then they were mostly quiescent for a while. That changed when I believe Saudi blew up an Iranian military supply flight on the runway within, I think it was Sana'a.
Correct. Yeah. The international airport.
Yeah. So
just last month.
State of play now is the Houthis have joined Iran. They have said that the Bab el-Mandeb is officially closed to Saudi traffic, and they are bombing Saudi's oil facilities on the western coast of that country, particularly the oil terminal at Yanbu, which is where the east-west pipeline terminates. It goes from the oil fields in the east to the port in the west, the port of Yanbu.
As well as refining facilities. And,
correct.
As we've seen with the Strait of Hormuz, you don't necessarily have to actually hit every ship that goes through the waterway. The simple threat will scare off a lot of shipping companies.
Yep. You just have to cause problems. You have to make things harder. You have to, raise the bar, make things less profitable. And then the system kind of falls apart all by itself. People don't want to take those risks. It's no longer profitable to get the oil out because you have to go, 2 to 3 weeks later, unless prices rise. And then if prices rise, Americans can't put gas in the truck. And if Americans can't put gas in the truck, then Trump loses the midterms. And, it's all part of this like economic leverage strategy that, from what I can tell, has been bearing fruit.
I think that's kind of the current state of play is like, it's now an economic battle of wills. Like,
that's right.
Who can bring more economic pain to bear, or who can withstand economic pain more. I want to emphasize something you said I think is really important, which is the Saudi-Iranian element of this, which really does, it goes back to the revolution, which we've talked about at length on previous episodes, but really the war in Iraq, the U.S. war in Iraq, is what kicked off the, in recent decades, sectarian rivalry between those countries, or at least put it on a new plane. And you have to remember, particularly after the Arab Spring, the Saudis are very concerned about whether there will be a contagion effect, right? They're seeing autocrats in places like Egypt get toppled. Maybe they're next on the list. Mm-hmm. And this all happens at the same time when, Iran has grown its influence in Iraq. They're competing in Syria. And so things really come to a fever pitch between Iran and Saudi Arabia at that time. And that's when Iran sees, hey, we have this opportunity with the Houthis, who are like sort of co-religionists, and that maybe
Yeah.
gives us a bit of an in. But more importantly, can like really play this role of causing problems for the Saudis and their American backers.
Yep. A good investment. Doesn't cost that much to get these guys missiles and drones and teach them how to use them. They're already good at fighting, and they have these bases that are just hard to deal with. So it's like, seems like a good deal all around, cost effective, and it's
It
proven
also
to be.
gives them, it gives them another arm into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict too.
Mm-hmm.
Hezbollah is much more important to Iran in that respect. But after October 7th, 2023, and the ensuing war in Gaza, the Houthis did launch missiles at Israel
From
and
the
at
south.
other Western-backed, interests throughout the Middle East.
Were
This
they attacking?
play,
Is it Ashdod or Haifa? I forget what the Red Sea port is.
I can't
Eilat.
remember. My
Yeah.
my brain doesn't recall that level of detail at this point. So it helps them there. That plays
Eilat.
Oh,
Yeah.
Eilat. Okay, right
Yeah.
at the you go
Southern
through the
tip.
Strait of Tiran. Yeah, that's the kind of
Exactly.
the southern Israeli port, right by Jordan. Yeah, this plays well internally within Yemen, certainly among Houthi constituents as well, to be able to take on the Israelis. So the fact that they've opened this new front is pretty significant,
Yes.
and could cause more or put more pressure on the Trump administration vis-a-vis Iran at a time when it seems like they don't really want to escalate things militarily any further.
Right. To your earlier point, the Trump administration has declared like double secret maximum economic pressure. To quote Animal House, it's like we're gonna do maximum pressure again, but it's I think he called it economic D-Day. And so the idea is the blockade of Iran is back on. We're gonna put even more sanctions on Iran. It's like, well, what's left to sanction? Like, I don't know, but apparently Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has thousands more entities to sanction from what he is saying. I don't know if that's true or not, but the idea is to like really, really squeeze the Iranians. Don't bomb them anymore because that wasn't working anyway. We had another round of 2 to 3 weeks of bombing, to which the Iranians responded. They hit all the military bases again, the regional bases, and also the allies and the refineries. We threatened to blow up bridges and power plants. I think we did a little bit of that, but mostly not. And now it's like, okay, we're going to squeeze you to death. And the Iranians are responding with their own squeeze, or they're trying to. My understanding is that the U.S. Navy has succeeded in getting some traffic out of the Strait of Hormuz by really closely following the Omani coastline
Yeah.
and staying as far away as it can from Iran. But it's like that adds expense, that adds danger, and it's not as good, right? And I don't know what's happening in the Red Sea right now, other than the Houthis are at war with Saudi Arabia. They recently hit a Saudi tanker, I believe, and killed some number of sailors. Meanwhile, I'm reading that the port of Eilat, the southern port for Israel into the Red Sea, has suspended all operations and effectively shut down as a result of this. So it's like that's kind of a big deal.
I mean, historically, that was a very big deal, right? When the
Yeah.
Egyptians closed the Strait of Tiran in 1967, that was actually the casus belli that led to the June 1967 war.
Yeah.
That's the strait that leads to Eilat. I mean, I have two questions, and then which I don't think we can answer, and then a
Yeah.
bunch of implications. Like, one is, have the Houthis stepped in this way partially because they are more confident that the war is going in Iran's favor?
Yeah, they kind of waited for a while, didn't they?
They did, right? Like
Yeah.
bandwagon. I mean, I actually think the answer to that is no, which has to do with my second question, but
Okay.
bracket that for just a second. But there was a report in the Wall Street Journal just the other day that Iran's hardliners do not necessarily want the war to end.
Yeah.
And they actually deliberately used this 60-day ceasefire, which sort of was falling apart before the deadline passed, to rearm, get more missiles and drones in order, kind of reinforce their proxy network. And it seems clear to me that the Trump administration is looking for a path out of this.
Yes. Pretty unsuccessfully, because the Trump administration is unwilling to admit defeat. It like Trump himself needs a way to declare victory, and the Iranian, whatever that may be, even if it's not actually a victory, it's like he needs some kind of deal,
face
right?
saving. Yeah.
Yes, some kind of face saving deal, and the June memorandum of understanding isn't good enough because the Iranians interpreted it as the Iranians will control the strait going forward, and so that was a non-starter with the Americans and their allies for obvious reasons. But they are pressing on that, and they are saying, we are going to hold you to the terms of the June deal. There will be no further negotiations that are not on those terms, which would be a humiliation for Trump and the United States.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that a lot and probably will continue to. I think, what's going to have to happen is he's going to have to get something he can sell on the nuclear front.
Something.
Yeah. But for now, the Iranians seem confident, and maybe the Houthis share that optimism. The reason I'm a little skeptical of that is, as you said, the immediate impetus for their getting more involved was this Saudi strike on Sana'a International Airport.
Right.
Which broke this ceasefire that had largely been in place for the past 4 years. And that leads to my second question, which is, why did the Saudis decide to do this? I mean, there's other reasons the Houthis might have done this, come to Iran's aid, right? Try to put some pressure on the United States on energy markets, ditto with Saudi Arabia. There's like a diversionary war explanation out there. Economic conditions in Houthi-controlled Yemen are not exactly great at this point. And as I said, they are deeply unpopular with parts of the population over which but they had been largely quiescent until this Saudi strike. And so that I find to be a puzzle, why the Saudis would choose to strike at this particular moment.
It's a great question. I have to think that it's part of a larger sort of communication with Iran over what the Saudis are willing to tolerate and what they're not willing to tolerate. And, we recall earlier in the Iran war, Iran did not necessarily hit all American allies in the region at the same rates or at the same times, right? Right. They definitely hit Saudi a lot, but they also modulated it depending on what the Saudis were saying or doing. And if we could get our friend Professor Andrew Lieber back on here, he knows this stuff way better than we do, and he follows it much more closely than we do. But the sense I get is that this was a message being sent to the Iranians that the Saudis the Saudis and the Emiratis and I think the Kuwaitis and maybe the Bahrainis as well actually joined in and bombed Iran. And we didn't know that at the time, but they started attacking Iran, at least some of those countries. I'm pretty sure Saudi and the UAE did.
The UAE for sure, and then I think there were some secret Saudi strikes as well.
Exactly. They didn't advertise it.
I haven't heard as much on Kuwait or Bahrain.
I may be wrong about those. I'll double check. But yeah, it's like the Saudis were getting punished and hit and kicked, and at a certain point they just felt like they had to respond. They had to do something, even though it didn't necessarily do that much militarily.
So I mean that might be right. And by the way, the Saudis have always considered this border to be very sensitive and crucial to their interests, right? It's right on their southern border. The Zaydi forces going back to like the 18th and 19th century would attack Wahhabi forces in Saudi Arabia, what is now Saudi. So they've always been very sensitive here. I guess it's a little puzzling to me that MBS and company had this 7-year-long war with the Houthis. It, by my money, failed.
Yeah, by most accounts. Yeah.
Yeah, they are able to see what's happening with the U.S.-Iran war right now, right? Like the U.S. is having a hard time resupplying forces because some of its forward operating bases in places like Bahrain were destroyed early in the war, which is why you're getting all these stories about conditions on the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft
Right.
carrier and all that. So it still strikes me as a little curious that they would choose to bring this actor in, which has the potential to complicate matters.
Just makes everything worse for them.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Maybe offline we can ask Andrew about it and see what he says. I
Yeah.
mean, since we're short on time, like the implications I have here, both like regionally and more broadly, I found pretty interesting. Which one we've talked about before, like these small players can actually have significant sway
Yeah.
on important international events, particularly if they can weaponize some of these critical choke points.
They all have air power now. They all have precision air power.
So
It's a
this
big
this
deal.
was my this was my next point: the diffusion of effective, low-cost, asymmetric military technology.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a huge deal as we go forward. This stuff
It
is
already
no
is.
longer within just the realm of great powers, right?
Yeah.
Like
These guys had Kalashnikovs, and they were bad enough to deal with then. And now it's like they have precision strike. It's like, that's
they've
not
got
good.
drones. They
Yeah.
have, suicide drone boats. They have ballistic missiles, which might not be great, but the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is well within range.
Yep.
It really makes it difficult. The resilience of Iran's axis of resistance. I recommend an article that was just published in Foreign Affairs about this, which I found very interesting.
Yeah.
Again, if you go back a year, most people were talking about how that axis had been decimated. And the situation looks a lot different today. And one of the reasons the authors of that article identify are a lot of these groups, Hezbollah, Iran-backed Shia militias, and the Houthis can now produce their own weapons technology and train their own forces and have alternative supply chains if their assistance from Iran is cut off. And that has made them a lot more difficult to deal with. Ditto for, Iran has maybe perfected this, but like sanctions and arms embargo evasions are a big deal. Thing we've talked about a lot, but shifting world order, another reason groups like the Houthis and Iran are able to withstand this pressure is they have an alternative outside power now in China, who might not be a deeply aligned country, but is sympathetic or friendly to some of their interests, or at least will conduct transactions that they view as narrowly within their own interests. And
Exactly.
that really, yeah,
It's enemy of my enemy, right?
yeah. We just talked about this, but it seems like there's not a great military solution to this conflict either. And we've talked a lot at length about this, but that seems to be the case for much of the Middle East.
This is actually my main takeaway from these regional militias. You can't actually defeat them in any meaningful sense. It's like you can kill half of them, but they'll just grow back. Like these are the people that live there, right? And the more of them you kill, the angrier they get. And plus they're in like remote mountain territory, and it's just they're almost like features of the geography, right?
It's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, certainly the Houthis, I think, and of course they control like the capital of Yemen, so they have urban areas and things like that. But in terms of their power base, it's like it's inaccessible. It's really tough to like defeat these guys and have them wave the white flag and give up and be like, okay, we're done. It's like that doesn't happen with the Houthis. It doesn't happen with Hezbollah. We keep trying, like the Israelis keep trying.
It
but
didn't
doesn't
happen
matter.
with the Taliban, at least
No.
not permanently.
No, they hung out. Like, it's like I remember like at the time when we were talking about withdrawing from Afghanistan, it's like we could stay there indefinitely. That's true, but it would be like living on the surface of Mars. It's like it's really hard, it's really expensive. You're going to get a lot of people are going to die, and to what end? Right? Like
So, I mean, to me, like, if strategy is about linking military capability to political outcomes, like, I don't want to generalize too much, but if these conflicts, you can generalize from them, it really raises questions about the utility of military force in some of these asymmetric conflicts.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means for what a great power war would look like. Certainly that would be very different, but
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing that's going to affect world politics going forward. And then lastly, just like a question. You could argue we already have a regional war. You could argue we've had a regional war since October 8th, 2023.
I would make that argument.
But is this going to ignite a more intense regional war? Like, does this mean, are we going to have a recommencement of a full-fledged Saudi war in Yemen that the Iranians then intervene in? Is that going to spill over into places like Iraq, so on and so forth? I think we're in a dangerous moment. I can tell from your facial expression that you're skeptical. I think I'm skeptical that it will be that kind of runaway escalation as well, but I think it is a dangerous moment right now.
I don't disagree. In a way, the saving grace is that the countries that would participate in said regional war do not have the wherewithal or the appetite to do it, from what I've seen. So we're talking about basically all the U.S. allies in the region, the Gulf monarchies, Saudi, so on. We've just seen them try really hard to sit out the Iran war, fail, get bombed anyway, respond, unclear whether that accomplished anything. And I don't see this as being any different. I think MBS took his best shot at these guys over the course of 7 years. They killed, I don't even know how many civilians in this process. A lot. Got nowhere. I think MBS is ruthless, but I don't think he's stupid. And I think what's going to end up happening is, and it's happening right now, there's no getting rid of Iran, which means there's no getting rid of the Houthis. I think even without Iran's support, the Houthis would be impossible to get rid of, which means that these countries have to do business with them. They're in the same neighborhood, which means that they will tacitly acknowledge Iran is in charge sooner or later and pay them off. I see this as a extraction thing, as a bribing thing, rather than a fighting thing.
Which then maybe we'll have to leave this for another time since we're short on time today. Like, now there's a real question of what will the Iranians accept?
Yeah, that I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, a good episode, quick episode. Great to see you again, Galen.
You too, man.
We will leave it there for now. And this has been another episode of Global Tantrum.